The smell of slow-cooked beef and roasted garlic had been filling Ray Colton's locker since early morning. He had packed the container before his shift started, same as always. Glass lid, rubber seal, his name written in black marker on the side. 3 hours of cooking the night before. His mother's recipe. Every spice measured the same way she had taught him. Every step done in the right order. He never rushed it. He never changed it. Ray was not the kind of man people noticed. He was average height, wide in the shoulders, quiet in the way that came from years of working alone. His job on Orion Dock 7 was maintenance, fixing pipes, replacing seals, crawling into spaces where the station's bones showed. He was good at it, not celebrated for it, just good. The dock was busy that day. A Vorkai trading ship had come in 2 hours early, and the whole loading corridor was loud with their clicking language and the heavy scrape of cargo being moved. The Vorkai were the dominant species on the station, tall, with 6 limbs, hard outer shells the color of dark rust, and eyes that reflected light like polished stone. They ran the trade routes. They owned most of the contracts. They did not think much of the mammal workers who kept the station running beneath their feet. Ray finished his morning rounds just past midday. He cleaned his tools, stored them in their case, and walked to the shared break area near Bay 4. It was a plain room, 2 long tables, a water dispenser, a rack of lockers along the wall. He put his lunch container on the table near the window, the same spot he always used. He went to wash his hands. That he was gone 4 minutes. Grub. That was what the human workers called the young Vorkai trader who had been hanging around Bay for all morning, waiting for his cargo clearance. Had walked in the break room while Ray was at the sink. He was not curious about the container. He was not hungry in the way humans understood hunger. He had simply seen an object sitting unclaimed on a surface, and his kind did not carry the same rules about ownership of food in shared spaces. He opened the lid, poked at the contents, took 2 bites with the small feeding appendages near his jaw, decided the smell was too sharp for his liking, and set the container back down. Not back on the table, but on the floor. Some of the contents had spilled. The glass lid had a crack in it. The rest of the food was still inside, but it had been touched, turned over, and left on the ground like waste. Mika Osei was already in the break room when Ray came back from the sink. She was sitting at the far table with her own meal, and she had watched the whole thing happen without being able to stop it fast enough. She knew Ray. She had worked beside him for 3 years. She saw his face when he came through the door and stopped walking. Ray looked at the floor. He looked at the container. He looked at Grub, who was already moving toward the exit. Indifferent, he did not shout. He had not stepped forward. He just stood very still. Mika had seen Ray Colton angry exactly once before, when a contractor had broken a seal on a life support line and lied about it. He had not raised his voice then either. He had just gone quiet in a way that made the room feel smaller. He went quiet now. He walked to the container. He crouched down. He picked it up carefully with both hands and looked inside at what was left. Then he set it on the table, reached under the lid where he always tucked it, and pulled out a small folded card that IT was paper. Old, soft paper, handwritten in faded ink. A recipe card. His mother had written it out for him the year before she got sick, so he would not forget the measurements. He had laminated it, but the laminate had cracked at one corner, and a smear of the sauce had gotten under it, spreading across 2 lines of her handwriting. That he looked at it for a long moment. Then he folded it back up and put it in his front pocket. Mika said his name quietly. He did not answer right away. He picked up the container, walked to the waste unit, and threw away what was left of the food. He rinsed the glass. He dried it with a cloth. He put it in his locker. Then he turned around and said, very calmly, "Which bay is that trader assigned to?" Mika told him. He nodded. "Thanks." He picked up his work case and walked back into the corridor. Mika sat alone in the break room for a moment. Then she pulled out her comm and sent a message to Nora Wills, the station security officer. IT said, "Something happened. Ray Colton is involved. You should know about it before it gets to your desk on its own." She sent it and went back to her food, but she did not taste any of it. Outside in the corridor, Ray was already walking toward the security office. He was not walking fast. He was not walking slow. He was walking the way a man walks when he has already decided what he is going to do, and the only thing left is to do it. The dock noise surrounded him. Cargo loaders, alien voices, the hum of the station beneath his boots. He did not look back. Nora Wills had a reputation on Orion Dock 7 for two things. First, she never lost a key. Second, she never closed a complaint without reading it fully, no matter how small it seemed. She was at her desk reviewing a cargo dispute when Ray Colton walked in and sat down across from her without being invited. She looked up. She had known Ray for 2 years. He was not the type to visit her office without reason. She set down her reader. He told her everything in plain, ordered sentences. What the container held, how long it took to make, where he had placed it and why, what he found when he came back. He described the cracked lid, the food on the floor, the smear on the recipe card. He did not dramatize any of it. He stated it like a man giving coordinates. Nora listened without interrupting. When he finished, she pulled up the Bay 4 camera feed and found the timestamp he gave her. She watched it. 30 seconds of footage showing Grubb opening the container, tasting it, losing interest, setting on the floor, and walking out. She watched it twice. Then she stood up, told Ray to wait, and went to find Grubb herself. She located him near his ship's cargo bay, talking with 2 crew members. She introduced herself by title, explained there was an incident report involving him, and asked him to come with her for a brief statement. Grubb looked at her the way most Vorkai looked at human station staff, with a particular kind of patience that was really just waiting for something more important to come along. He clicked something to his crew members that the translator rendered as minor delay and followed her in the security office. With Ray still seated in the corner, Nora showed Grubb the camera footage that he watched it. Then he looked at Nora and said that he did not understand the concern. The surface had been shared. The container had not been marked as restricted. In Vorkai practice, food left in open areas was available to anyone who needed it. He had found it unsatisfactory and set it aside. On the floor, Nora said that he paused. The floor was the nearest flat surface. Ray said nothing. Nora told Grubb that on this station, under human labor codes adopted when Orion Dock 7 first opened, personal food containers marked with a worker's name were considered private property. Tampering with them, consuming from them, or disposing of them without consent was a breach of station conduct. Grubb was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into a chest pocket, produced a small credit chip, and held it out toward Ray. "I will offer compensation," he said. "A reasonable amount for the loss of a meal." Ray looked at the credit chip. He did not reach for it. "It was not a meal," he said. "It was the last thing my mother taught me to make before she died." Grubb held the chip in the air a moment longer, then withdrew it slowly. Nora said she was logging the incident formally. Grubb was free to go, but he should expect a follow-up. He left without another word. What happened next took less than an hour. Grubb's handler, a senior Vorkai trader named Doss, appeared at Nora's office and informed her that Grubb was a registered guest of the station under a Tier 2 trading contract. Incidents involving Tier 2 guests were subject to administrative discretion, not standard labor codes. He suggested the credit offer had been generous. He suggested the matter be closed. Nora told him she would check the relevant codes. He told her Director Havoc had already been informed and agreed with his interpretation. 20 minutes later, Nora's comm received a message from Director Havoc. It was polite, brief, and very clear. "Accept the standard compensation. Close the report. Move on." She read the message 3 times. Then she walked back to where Ray was still sitting. She told him everything. She did not soften it. Ray nodded slowly. He looked at the floor. Then he looked up and said, "The station charter. The one from the original labor negotiations when humans first came aboard." Nora blinked. "What about it? Does it still have the cultural grievance clause?" She opened her terminal. Searched for it. Found it buried in an appendix that had not been referenced in years, possibly ever. It allowed any station worker to file a formal cultural grievance if a personal item of cultural or memorial significance was damaged or disrespected by another party. It required a panel hearing. It could not be dismissed by administrative order alone. She read it twice to be sure. "It's still there," she said. Ray asked for a grievance form. Nora pulled it up, printed it, and set it on the desk. Ray filled it out by hand, slowly and carefully. He listed everything. He attached the camera footage timestamp. He wrote a full description of the recipe card and what it represented. He signed it at the bottom. He slid it back across the desk. Nora looked at it. Ray, this is going to make things complicated. Good, he said. He stood up, picked up his work case, and walked out. Nora sat alone for a moment. Then she stamped the form, opened the official intake log, and filed it under the station charter's cultural grievance protocol. She entered the date, the time, and the name of the respondent. Under the section marked Expected Response from Respondent Party, she typed, Grub, Vorkai, Bayfer. Then she leaned back in her chair and thought about how long it had been since anyone on this station had used that clause. She could not remember a single time. The hearing room on Orion Dock 7 was used mainly for cargo disputes. It smelled like recycled air and old upholstery. 3 chairs sat on one side of the long table for the panel. 2 chairs on the other side for the filing party. Ray arrived early. He was wearing his clean work uniform. No insignia, no rank, just a gray jacket with the station patch on the shoulder. He carried a folder of printed documents under one arm, and in his other hand he carried a small animal carrier with a mesh front panel. Inside the carrier, a gray cat with one torn ear sat and looked at the room without blinking. Mika arrived 2 minutes later. She sat beside Ray, set her own folder on the table, and looked at the carrier. You actually brought her, she said. Yes, Ray said. They're going to ask why. I know. The panel entered shortly after, Director Havoc in the center, flanked by 2 Vorkai trade representatives. Then Envoy Dreth walked in and took a seat at the far end of the table. Not quite part of the panel, not quite an observer. He was older than most Vorkai Ray had seen. His shell was darker, and he moved with the kind of careful slowness that meant either authority or age. Probably both. Grubb sat across the room with Doss beside him. He looked bored. Havoc opened the hearing and gave a short summary of the grievance. He did not sound enthusiastic. He read the clause from the charter in a flat voice, then looked at Ray and said, You may present. Ray opened his folder. He did not rush. He began by describing the recipe card. He explained what it was. Paper, handwritten, his mother's instructions in her own words. He explained that she had written it for him during her last year, because she had known she would not always be there to make the dish herself. He explained that he cooked from it every week, that it was the way he kept a connection to someone he could no longer talk to. He placed the card on the table. The sauce stain was visible even across the room. Havoc looked at it. The 2 trade representatives looked at each other. Grubb did not look at it. Then Mika spoke. She was a cafeteria supervisor who had spent years feeding over 400 station workers every day. She knew food. She explained human food culture the way someone explains something they believe in. Not as a lecture, but as something obvious that had simply never been said out loud before in this room. She talked about birthday meals and funeral meals. She talked about the way a smell could bring back a dead person so clearly that the grief felt fresh again. She talked about how humans taught their children to cook not to pass on nutrition, but to pass on memory. She said that when a Vorkai dropped that container on the floor, he had not wasted a meal. He had broken something that could not be replaced. The room was quiet. Envoy Dreth had not taken his eyes off Mika since she started speaking. Then Ray said, I would like to introduce one more piece of context. He reached down and opened the latch on the carrier. The cat, Sable, the workers called her, though she had no official registration on the station, stepped out onto the table with the complete confidence of something that had never once doubted it belonged wherever it went. She sat down, folded her paws under her chest, and regarded the panel. Point 2 of the Vorkai at the table shifted backward slightly. It was not a large movement, but it was there. Vorkai had an old, instinctive discomfort around small, unpredictable predators. Their ancestral homeworld had something similar. The feeling was not rational. It remained anyway. Havoc said, What is the relevance of this animal? Ray said, She was found in a waste bay 3 years ago. Both back legs were broken. Someone had left her there. I found her and I took her in. I fixed what I could. She cannot run well, but she is healthy. He paused. Humans do that. We take broken things home. We don't leave them on the floor because they're inconvenient. The room stayed quiet. Grubb was no longer looking bored. Envoy Dreth leaned forward slightly and said, speaking for the first time since the hearing began, What is it that you want as resolution, Mr. Colton? Ray said he wanted the station to acknowledge that the item damaged had cultural and memorial value. He wanted a formal record that it had not been treated as such. He was not asking for credits. He was not asking for Grub to be punished. He was asking for acknowledgement. Havoc said the panel needed time to deliberate. He adjourned the hearing that as people filed out. Dreth stayed behind. He stood near the table and looked at the recipe card that Ray had not yet picked up. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. Mika watched him from the doorway. When Dreth finally looked up, he said quietly, to no one in particular, "We were told that human workers adapted easily to station culture because they did not form strong attachments to possessions." Mika said, "Whoever told you that has never watched a human cook." Dreth looked at her. Then he looked at the cat, who was still sitting on the table, unimpressed by everyone in the room. He picked up his notes and left without another word. But in the corridor, before he turned the corner, he told his aide to pull every human labor record on file for Orion Dock 7, all of them. The hearing adjourned on a Tuesday. By Thursday, Nora's inbox had 47 new submissions. None of them were violent. None of them were dramatic. They were forms. Printed, signed, submitted through the proper intake channels, each one referencing a different article of the station charter. Missing safety equipment that had been reported and never replaced. Wage calculations that did not match logged hours. Rest period violations from the previous 18 months. A structural complaint about a water seal in Bay 2 that 3 different maintenance workers had flagged and that had been marked reviewed without any repair being made. Nora sat at her desk and read through them one by one. She had known about most of these. She had filed some of them herself over the years and watched them disappear into the station's administrative silence. What was different now was the timing. They had all come in within 48 hours of Ray's hearing, and they all had one thing in common. Each one was attached to a copy of the cultural grievance clause from the station charter, noted as reference material. The human workers on Orion Dock 7 had been watching. They had seen Ray sit down in that hearing room with his folder and his cat and his quiet voice, and something had shifted for them. Not loudly. Humans on this station had learned a long time ago that loud did not work. What they had seen was that the rules existed. Old rules. Forgotten rules. Rules that had been written during the original labor negotiations when humans first signed on. Rules that no administrator had thought to remove because no one had thought they would ever actually be used. They were being used now. Mika had played a part in it. After the hearing, she had gone back to the cafeteria and talked. She had not told people what to do. She had just explained what Ray had done and how he had done it, step by step, rule by rule. She had answered questions for 2 hours straight without stopping to eat her own food. That be why the next morning, people had been digging through the station charter on their own time. Old Pev, who had worked cargo loading for 11 years, found a clause about mandatory equipment inspections that entitled workers to request external review if internal reviews were consistently not acted on. He submitted the request before breakfast. 2 women from the sanitation crew. Both of them had worked on the station longer than half the Vorkai traders had been alive, submitted a joint complaint about shift scheduling that referenced a labor equity standard from the founding agreement. They had calculated the discrepancy down to the minute. The young man, named Cole, who fixed electrical conduits on the upper deck, submitted a written account of 3 separate occasions when he had been physically moved out of a corridor by Vorkai crew members who had not apologized or been asked to. He listed dates, times, and locations. He attached camera timestamps. None of it was angry. It was exact. Director Havoc called Envoy Dreth to his office at midday on Thursday and showed him the stack of incoming complaints. Dreth looked through several of them. He did not seem surprised. "How many total?" he asked. 47 as of this morning, Havoc said. "More coming. My staff is telling me it will be over 60 by end of day." Dreth turned a page. "And these are all properly submitted? Within the bounds of the charter?" Havoc said yes through his teeth. Dreth was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something that Havoc had not expected. He said, "This is not chaos. This is a negotiation." Havoc stared at him. Dreth set the papers down. In Vorkai commerce, when a party has been accumulating grievances over a long time and then presents them all at once, it is a tactical move. It signals that the other party has been in breach long enough that patience has run out. It is not aggression. It is the opening of formal renegotiation. He looked at Havoc. These workers are not rioting. They are not threatening. They are telling you that they have been waiting, and now they have decided to stop waiting. Havoc said he did not see how that changed anything. The complaints still had to be processed. Yes, Dreth said. They do. He asked Havoc for a full list of all current human workers on Orion Dock 7, their contract terms, and a history of any complaints previously filed and closed without resolution. Havoc asked why. Dreth said because the Vorkai High Commerce Council had sent him to assess trade stability on this station, and nothing destabilized trade faster than a workforce that had stopped believing the rules applied to them. The rules do apply, Dreth said. The workers know it. They're proving it. The question now is whether the administration is going to prove it too. He left Havoc's office and sent a message to the Commerce Council. He marked it urgent. Back in the break room near Bay 4, Ray was eating lunch. Mika had made him a simple meal, rice and stewed beans, nothing elaborate. He ate at the table by the window, the same spot as always. Sable was in her carrier on the bench beside him. Watching the corridor through the mesh point, 3 other workers sat at the table without being asked. They did not make a big moment of it. They just sat down and ate. Nobody talked much. Nobody needed to. Outside in the corridor, the station moved around them the way it always had, loud and busy and full of things that seemed more important than a few workers eating lunch together. But something was different now. Everyone could feel it, even without saying so. Envoy Dreth requested a private meeting with Ray Colton on a Friday afternoon through official channels with a written agenda. The agenda said, follow up on grievance filing. Informal discussion. Ray read it, then showed it to Mika. She said he should go. He said he already planned to. They met in one of the small consultation rooms near the administrative level. A neutral space, no panel, no table full of papers. 2 chairs, a low table, a window that showed cargo ships moving in the dark outside. Dreth was already seated when Ray arrived. He had no aide with him. Ray sat down and waited. Dreth began by acknowledging that the hearing had not yet issued a formal ruling. He said this was partly because the panel needed more time, and partly because the larger situation on the station, the wave of grievance filings, had complicated the timeline. He said he wanted to understand something before the ruling came through. He asked Ray what had made him do it, not file the complaint. He understood that. He meant what had made Ray stay calm. What had made him go through channels instead of doing something that would have gotten him thrown off the station. He said he had reviewed other incidents involving Vorkai and human workers, and in most of them, the human worker had either accepted the compensation offered or reacted with enough anger to justify closing the case against them. Ray had done neither. Dreth wanted to know why. Ray thought about it for a moment. Then he said that it was not really about being calm. He said the day it happened, he had felt the same things anyone would feel, the heat in his chest, the sudden want to say something very loud. He had felt all of it. He had just decided it would not help. He said his mother had taught him that too. Dreth asked about her. Ray was quiet for a moment. He looked at the window. Then he talked. She had been a repair technician, same as him, working on equipment in a manufacturing plant near the coast. She had worked long shifts in loud conditions for most of her adult life. She was not a famous person, and she was not a wealthy person. What she was, Ray said, was someone who knew how to make something out of almost nothing. A Sunday meal that turned a bad week into something bearable. A house that always smelled like something cooking. She had made the recipe card because she knew her hands are going to stop working before her mind did, and she wanted him to be able to taste her cooking even after she was gone. He reached into his pocket and placed the card on the low table between them. Dreth looked at it without touching it. Ray said he was not angry that Grubb had taken the food. He understood it had not been malicious. He was angry that no one had thought it needed to be treated as something worth taking seriously. The food on the floor, that was not an accident of culture. That was indifference. Dreth was quiet for a long time. Then he said something Ray had not expected. He said that in Vorkai culture, when someone died, their belongings were documented and assessed for practical value. What could be used was redistributed. What could not was discarded cleanly. There was no ceremony for objects. The idea that a piece of stained paper could hold a person's presence. could carry love across years after someone's body was gone, was not something his culture practiced. He said that did not make it wrong. He said it was something he had not considered before. Ray nodded. He picked the card back up and tucked it away. Dreth said he would be pushing for the ruling to go in Ray's favor. He also said he was recommending a formal review of station labor conditions, not as a concession, but because after reading 63 years of combined grievance filing from human workers on Orion Dock 7, it was clear that the station had been running on a debt it had never acknowledged. Ray said he appreciated that. He said he had not done it for a ruling. He had done it because if he had walked away, the next time something happened to him or to someone near him, there would be no record that it had ever mattered. Dreth said he understood. They sat for a moment in the quiet. Then Dreth said carefully, "Is the cat also from your mother?" Ray almost smiled. "No, I found her in a waste bay. She had 2 broken legs, and you repaired them, as much as I could." Dreth looked at the window. In Vorkai culture, we do not often keep animals that cannot serve a function. It is considered impractical. Ray said, "She keeps me company. That's a function." Dreth did not answer that, but he did not dismiss it either. When the meeting ended and Ray left, he walked down the corridor toward the lower decks. At the turn near Bay 3, he passed Mika, who was leaning against the wall waiting for him with a covered container in her hands. She held it out. He took it, opened it. Steam rose from it, the same dish. His mother's recipe. The spices were almost right. The texture was close. He looked at her. She shrugged. "I've been watching you make it for 3 years. I know most of it." He closed the lid. "It's good. Sunday," she said. "I'll make it again. We'll get it right." He nodded. He sat at the window table and ate while the dock moved around him, loud and ordinary, and for the first time in a while, something close to fair. The ruling came on a Monday, 2 weeks after the hearing. Nora read it at her desk first. Then she printed a copy and walked it down to the maintenance level herself because she wanted to hand it to Ray in person that he was replacing a pressure valve on a water line when she found him. He wiped his hands on a cloth and took the paper. IT was 3 pages. The panel had found in his favor. The cultural grievance clause had been applied in full. The damaged item, the recipe card, was officially classified in the station record as a personal memorial object of documented emotional significance. The station was required to acknowledge the breach, and Grubb was required to issue a formal cultural apology. Not credits, not a written statement filed somewhere no one would read. A spoken apology delivered in person, recorded in the station log. Ray folded the paper and put it in his pocket. "How's Grubb taking it?" he asked. Nora said he was not taking it well. His handler Doss had spent 3 days arguing the wording with the panel. But the charter was the charter. The ruling stood. The apology happened that afternoon in the same hearing room where the whole thing had started. Grubb stood across from Ray and delivered it in his own language, with a translator rendering it in flat, careful words. He said he had not understood the significance of what he had taken. He said he understood it now. He said the action had been wrong, that IT was stiff and short, and he did not make eye contact. Ray said thank you and meant it anyway. Outside in the corridor, Doss stopped him before he could walk away. He said that Grubb had actually asked questions about human food customs the previous night and had spent 2 hours reading translated documentation. He said the young trader had not slept well since the day of the incident. Ray looked at him. "Good," he said, and walked on. The labor review moved quickly after that, driven by Dreth's recommendation. Nora was appointed to a new oversight committee, the first human to hold such a position on Orion Dock 7. She accepted without a speech and started reading files. The water seal in Bay 2 was repaired within the week. Wage discrepancies were recalculated and back payments issued. The corridor access complaint led to a new conduct policy. All station staff, regardless of species, were required to give passage priority to workers carrying equipment. A small rule. It mattered. Director Havek told his assistant that he was frustrated with how the situation had developed. His assistant, a young Vorkai named Rel, who had been on the station for less than a year and had been quietly reading the station charter in her off hours, said she thought the outcome was reasonable. Havek looked at her for a long moment and then said he needed more coffee. He did not argue with her. Sable was officially registered in the station database as an emotional support organism. The classification had been created specifically for her by Nora, who had found an old welfare subsection in the charter that allowed for documented companion animals in crew living quarters under certain health conditions. She had filled out the paperwork herself and submitted it without telling Ray until it was already approved. He found out when a small laminated tag appeared on Sable's carrier that said, "Station registered. Deck 4. Owner, R. Colton." He kept the tag point 3 weeks after the ruling. A new worker arrived on Orion Dock 7. Her name was Yessa, a young Prethei, a species the station had only recently begun accepting on work contracts. Her kind were small, gray-skinned, with large dark eyes and a tendency to be very still when they were nervous. She had never been on a multi-species station before that on her second day. She walked into the break room near Bay 4 and saw a container sitting on a table by the window. Her name was not on it. She was hungry. She reached for a point. 3 humans looked up. They did not shout. They did not step toward her. One of them, Mika, said, "That one's taken. There should be an unclaimed section on the lower shelf." Yessa froze. Her eyes were wide. Ray set down his own meal and looked at her. He could see that she was not trying to steal anything. She was just new and did not know the rules, yet he picked up a spare plate, spooned some of his food onto it, and slid it across the table. "Sit down," he said. "There's enough." Yessa looked at the plate. Then she looked at him. Then she looked at the cat sitting on the bench beside him, which was staring at her without blinking. She sat down slowly, like she was not sure the chair was going to hold. Nobody made a big deal of it. They just kept eating. After a while, Mika passed Yessa the printed sheet Ray had made. 1 page, plain language, explaining human food customs on the station. Personal containers, shared shelves, the meaning of a name written on the side. Yessa read it. Then she folded it and put it in her pocket. The dock hummed around them. Cargo moved. Ships came and left. The station ran the same as always, except that somewhere on a server in the administrative level, under a charter clause untouched for decades, there was now a record that said these workers had been here, that their things mattered, and that someone had stood up and said so. Security had been watching the docks for threats from outside. No one had noticed what was happening inside. Quietly, over lunch, one filed form at a time, until it was already done.